And so, as the bumper tells you, it's the Ochelli Effect. I'm your host, Chuck Ochelli, here on UCY.TV. It's Saturday night, the 16th day of, well, May. Almost said March, I think. Frazzled and hassled and all that good stuff lately. Anyway, tonight we're going to do something a little bit different, like I always try to do. Oh, man, oh, man, oh, man. By the way, I want to thank everybody who decided to tune in, whether you're catching it further on down the line on YouTube or you've decided to go to ucy.tv/TOE. And if you're using your fondle slab of choice and catching us on your applicable application of choice, also a nice thank you as well. Been a strange week, that's for sure. So, at any rate, we'll see where all this goes. My guest for tonight is going to be Lee Bracker, who has some interesting viewpoints on a lot of things. And, Skype is doing weird stuff today, man. I actually was trying to get through to somebody earlier and talk to them, a friend in Canada who's working on a documentary, and I had literally 3 places to be able to answer the call that was coming in, and couldn't get one of them to work. Then one of them did work, and the other 2 kept ringing. That was loads of fun. And then, of course, trying to use video earlier was another big trip. So, God knows, I probably got to shut down everything when I'm done doing this tonight. Of course, after I'm done, the Jaded Show will start. We'll see where that goes this week. I never have any idea, and just for everybody's clarification, I have absolutely no control over what Kim does, so, you know, and that's her gig. I am just the alleged extra person there, the alleged co-host, whatever. All right, so. Anyway, what else did I say? Well, B.B. King died. That was interesting to me because a whole lot of people kept saying to me they thought that he was already dead. And it's like, no, he just does diabetic commercials. But now, yes, he's actually dead. Of course, most people probably don't care about that and all of that good stuff. But, hey, you know, because we're too busy worried about whether we're going to get a Bush or a Clinton and all that kind of fun stuff. Come on, you. There we go. And there we go. So, as I was saying, this gentleman, Lee Bracker, is an interesting guy. I'm going to let him tell you about him instead of doing my usual talk-up about the kind of person that he is and where he comes from regarding, his stances, etc., etc. Not going to bother with all of that. And that noise there tells me that that Lee is on. You don't need the video, though, Lee, so you can kill that. If you get a chance there. There we go. So the thing is, I didn't even know exactly how to sort of explain you, describe you to the audience. And I said to them, I will just let you do that. So, how about we start there?
Hello? Oh, you're talking to me?
Yes, I was.
Hi, Charles. How you doing?
I'm doing all right. I'm doing all right.
I'm sorry. I just logged in. I wasn't listening to the beginning of the show.
Ah, okay. Well, I was having trouble pulling you up on the Skype anyway. I was wondering what was going on, so big fun. Anyways, like I was saying to the audience that I have no idea exactly how to describe you, which is kind of a unique thing. Usually I have good descriptive sort of thing to sort of pigeonhole somebody into a spot and say, this is the kind of guy I'm bringing on tonight and this is what we're going to discuss. But realistically, that can't be done with you. Okay? And you got to remember, I mean, again, I don't script any of this stuff. I don't do pre-interviews of any kind. I mean, you and I have had conversations, but actually what we're going to start off talking about tonight, we haven't actually had any conversation on, in any detail or anything. But first I wanted to give you a chance to just sort of introduce yourself to the audience, however it is you feel it is appropriate to do so.
Okay. No, that's fine. I won't belabor it. I'll, basically... Well, let's see. I grew up in southern Arizona, south of Tucson, and when I went to college, I decided to take on a career designing products. So I studied industrial product styling and design, which I bring that up because what it did was it gave me a full understanding of how things come together, how things work, what it takes to design a product that would function with people, for people, and a particular methodology which I use today in the kind of research that I do. It's very, very important for me because it's rather unusual, but it works. So we've all heard the term back engineering or reverse engineering.
Mm-hmm.
To solve problems, investigate the kind of investigations that I've been on from international crime scenes and crime instances, false flag operations, to, you've seen some of the work that I've done on civilizations, ancient civilizations, bringing together ideas that form a plausible understanding of what it is and maybe solutions to things that people have contemplated for a long time. So it's very valuable. I no longer design products. I cut that off early in my career. I liked writing a lot more, and from that I developed sort of a knack for, because I have a design background, for doing video editing and compilations, which is something that I accompany with my articles now. I do video documentaries as much as I can to illustrate the points that I'm making, and there's a broad spectrum about me, beginning with health and wellness. So when I published my first book in 2009, it was really for myself, but it ended up being something that I published print on demand so that other people can have what I had learned from very, very important people across the world. And my mentor lived in Tucson, Arizona. I logged in about 3 years with that gentleman who knew a lot of your very, very, what do you call it, prophetic or profound individuals that have been around since Tesla, all the way on up to, he worked under Werner von Braun. I'm sorry, I'm talking about NASA there. Wilhelm Reich here in Tucson. And that's when the understanding of argon energy came about. Well, I got lucky. I just learned from somebody who taught me and introduced me to quite a number of people that wouldn't be available to anybody unless, yeah, go ahead.
Well, this would kind of give a good explanation for the sort of convalescence of circumstances that create the sort of unique style you have. Because I give you that. I don't see too many people that go as far all over the map as you do. Seemingly regarding a lot of the sort of the hidden knowledge and the interesting kind of ideas that float out there that are often sort of attacked by the more skeptical people in various communities, not just like alternative media communities, but the mainstream pretty much attacks a lot of the kind of stuff that you talk about as well. But you don't seem to hold any sort of prejudice regarding that. That's for sure. And you seem to cross all these different boundaries with this very unique perspective, which seems to be, it's again hard to codify. But the bottom line is that we're talking about a style of writing that's based on reverse engineering what happens, and it looks like I might have lost Lee temporarily. What we're gonna do is we're gonna get into one of the first articles of his that I decided to look at recently, and we're also going to talk about some of the video pieces, the films that he's put together regarding a couple of different angles on a couple of different subjects. Now, the first interesting part of this would be related to the. Okay, well, for some reason I lost contact there. All right, we're all good again. But Lee is still not back on. I'll bring him back in. The thing is that the first part of an article that I was looking at had to do with a recent motion picture. It seemed at the top of the article had a lot to do with this movie Interstellar, etc. Um, which I decided to watch because somebody suggested it. Now, the reason why they suggested it was for this very spiritual, somewhat arcane ideas and sort of to relate them into a modern context. And for those of you who haven't seen the movie, I mean, there's essentially this sort of futuristic idea where food is, crumbling. The food supplies are crumbling, and there are these crop farmers who are attempting to continue on with the traditional farming, but their crop rotations are decaying because of blight and things like this. They've sort of lost. At the beginning of the movie, I think there is going to be no more okra grown ever again. Then it seems as though the cornfields are also being attacked by blight, etc., etc. The planet has been rather disrupted by this sort of dust storm, which seems to cover everything. So agricultural resources have been strangled. The world's population is not in very good shape. And as an aside, kind of like now, Jules, you're correct, but more extreme, like the more, ad absurdum final reduction to what actually would occur based on our current trajectory, right? So what happens here is that not only is that sort of storyline going on, but there's this guy who has been, put into a position where he has to be a farmer, but he's also he at one time was a test pilot and was somebody who wanted to work for NASA. Now he has a rather intelligent child who seems to be extremely intuitive, who is interested in all these great things that he's taught about, and meanwhile he gets called into a school conference at the beginning of the movie, and this is where I find the whole thing rather funny, of course. The school conference is about his daughter not conforming to the curriculum and being absolutely ridiculous because the newly state-issued schools will tell you that that the NASA program was a hoax and that there was never a landing on the moon, there never was a space program, etc., etc., etc. And this is the official line as far as the government is concerned, as far as the great corporation is concerned. People don't need to look at the stars or anything like that. We're obviously in this scenario so entrenched in the battle for survival regarding agriculture and things like this that nobody has time for that kind of stuff. So our loving government has turned around and decided to make it so that there is no so that there is no time and no need for resources to be invested into space travel, scientific exploration, or anything else if it doesn't have to do with the battle for survival regarding us battling the environment to continue on agriculturally. Okay, fine. So he gets called into this conference, mind you, because his daughter found an older book of his where they describe, the space program and, us actually landing on the moon and all that kind of stuff. And it has been, relegated to the pile of conspiracy theories and nonsense, which are totally not productive, like the reverse of what we see now, where individuals will claim that there was absolutely no moon landing, that the space program was nothing but a sham, in order to bankrupt the Soviets, this kind of stuff being said in the movie, except in this case, it's not the, free-floating conspiracy theorists on the internet that are making that case. It is now the state, which has decided that that is the official narrative, that is the truth, in order to, of course, protect us from intellectual exploration, which will be entirely fruitless, right? So, that being said, the movie then continues on because there is an interaction between the little girl and the school. The father is proud that his little girl, sticks to the reality and the truth and thinks outside of the box and is obviously more intelligent than their teachers, who are doing nothing but spewing and regurgitating the curriculum which was handed, as always, the script. They stay on script. She denies it, fights against it, so you're sort of meant to identify, if you're one of an alternative thinking persuasion, you are meant to identify with the little girl, obviously, and also the scenario. So it is an interesting movie from a psychological standpoint, and it's also visually interesting. I don't usually laud or applaud anything that comes out of Hollywood anymore, because it's mostly reboots and regurgitated ideas and remakes and and so on, and maybe some sequels now and then, although I do hold up some sort of high hopes for the Star Wars movie after I took a look at the trailer. Sorry, I guess it's my childhood speaking back to me, when I wanted a great distraction. But anyway, continuing on with the story, of course, he applauds his daughter's efforts and takes her home and, I don't know, gives her ice cream or something, I forget. But anyway, that's not the point. What occurs next is that, she has these interactions with this ghost-type figure in the house, and this presence seems to be doing odd things like knocking books off a shelf. So, oddly typical sort of Hollywood, you figure it's a poltergeist nonsense is on its way, but that's not what happens. Okay? What happens is, after a while, there's sort of a coherent message that seems to be getting transferred, sort of echoing from these alleged sort of poltergeist activities from what she calls her ghost. The father says, I don't believe in ghosts. She says, well, why not? This and that, back and forth. And he says, well, I'll tell you what, if you can bring me scientific evidence and you can examine it from a scientific standpoint, then we'll have the conversation about ghosts. So what does she do? She takes a book and begins to sort of collect data, which is, of course, one of the wonderful things that you're supposed to do when you're actually examining something and seeking out the truth regarding it. One of those things that's often forgotten by so many people that are already convinced by their vague ideas and simply parroting the sentiments of others as they choose to do constantly, and you know who you are. Anyway, so this continues on. She begins to collect the data, notices that there is a pattern in certain movements, discovers that there is, something being said. She tries to figure out if it's Morse code. She tries to figure out if it is some other type of rudimentary communication, because there seems to be a numerical and figurative pattern that is emerging from the data she's collecting. Discovers that it is binary code, okay, and that binary code is stating some sort of message, but the first thing they do is discover coordinates, find a secret area, a secret base of sorts, and discover that NASA is still alive and breathing, but has now gone into the covert section of the government and its mechanisms, so on and so forth. The gentleman, because he was a great test pilot, is invited in to be part of this project. And, of course, Lee, you can tell now that I've been telling the story of, of the movie Interstellar, right?
Right. Yeah.
That's what I was doing while I was trying to sort out our communications and find out what was going on. By the way, I can't reach the house phone while I'm on the computer, so that was Kim who answered that, just so you know. Anyway, back to it. So all of this is going on, and this is a really interesting story. That's for certain. And like I said earlier, I mean, I don't really enjoy very much that comes out of Hollywood any longer because I usually see straight through it and understand the agendas, the propaganda, the completely, counterintuitive go back to sleep and assume that here's your line of crazy and your line of wrong in the sand and follow it. So I don't enjoy very many movies or TV shows anymore, but this one was actually not bad. Not bad. I mean, kind of well written. A few things were a little hokey and campy, but what can you do? You can't, complicate the story so much that the general public can't even begin to grasp the overall story arc entirely, right? But you wrote an article that has a little something to do with this. So there's where we'll bring it back to you.
Yeah, there was one of those movies I felt that I could go be entertained for a couple of hours and walk out not finding any occult messages. And sure enough, there's always one built into it, and it's usually pretty prevailing. I catch them right away now just because I've been studying this for so long. And they're not the typical pyramid with the Horus eye, the all-seeing eye, and the numbers 32, 33, 12, and then the letter X. It's none of that anymore. It's deeper than that. It's
not the
part
Da Vinci,
of the dialogue.
Yeah, it's not the Da Vinci Code. Okay, it's which was a little more blatant and seemingly to convince yourself that if you understood it, you might have some intellectual high ground just by understanding it, which is absolutely ridiculous. But the thing is, it doesn't encourage you to pat yourself on the back, and there's actually sort of a multifaceted hidden grouping of things going on here. And one of them is the occult. I was starting to talk to the sociological, the interesting narrative about switching conspiracy theory and creating cover-ups via conspiracy theory to the power of the state, regarding the early sequences with the little girl in the school. Because now, the idea of the moon landings being faked and NASA being a fictitious organization that was a political mechanism to bankrupt the Soviet Union, that whole idea has sort of just slipped in there, and that being backed by the state now, not by the wide-eyed conspiracy theorist, but that being a mechanism of the state itself. I found that kind of humorous.
I'm glad you brought that up because I didn't, in my little video documentary, I didn't talk about that aspect, but you're bringing it up now, the Russian element from what was she? One of the administrators of the school for...
Oh, that's right, yeah.
For his son.
Also, one of the authoritarian figures had to be Russian. The other one being, clearly typically American. But just the fact that the state-issued book supports the conspiracy theory in order to keep people distracted is just remarkably, sardonically funny to me. And because that's like our reality now, where they turn around and they purposely prop up garbage, in a lot of cases to keep us distracted from the people who are doing the real work. And take your pick as to where you want to begin to figure out who or what I'm talking about, but it's all over the place. So I find it funny that that's almost like one of those glaring admissions. You've heard of a glaring omission. This is a glaring admission, kind of by the Hollywood people there. I found that funny, but of course the occult symbology that flows through quite prolifically as well, that is completely ubiquitous as well, is also present throughout the film. But I find it remarkable that it's sort of, it's definitely the layers of the onion happening in front of your eyes.
Did you happen to see the film Hugo?
That one I did not see, no.
And did you see any of the other films that I had mentioned? Well, let me ask you this. Did you have an opportunity to view the video documentary that I accompanied that article with?
I did not view the documentary. I looked at the article and I went through that, and that was interesting enough. I didn't want to get myself too educated on what you were going to say because I wanted to sort of organically discover it on the air.
Okay, I see.
Yeah.
The reason I ask is because I do have other illustrations that don't accompany the article, but they are in the video that demonstrate the resemblance between, well, I'll just call it out, Hitler and NASA, Project Paperclip, and the fact that when you look at the principal character of Hugo, I think some of your listening audience has seen that movie. That the little boy, his haircut, the color of hair and the style, is very familiar to Adolf Hitler.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, when he was a youth, there is a photograph of Hitler when he was 6 or 7 years old, which is about the time frame of the little boy that, well, he was a little older in the film, Hugo. They look alike. But the actress that plays the opposite role of Donna Haight, whatever his name is, she's the daughter of the mission control specialist. Basically resembles sort of like Werner von Braun, but his name is Brand, Dr. Brand.
Right.
His daughter has the same haircut.
Well, that's true, and even the main character in the film, these are subtle visual cues that are also integrated in here. But if you take a look at the main character, he's got some resemblances to some interesting people. He's sort of completely out of his element, regarding who he is. If you take a look at the hairstyle, the basic clothing style, a lot of the mannerisms even that seem to be encouraged by, and this is interesting because normally I don't find McConaughey very interesting, in anything else except, a couple of movies where, you could have put, I don't know, a sock monkey in the same role and you would have gotten through with it because it was so compelling, right?
In the beginning, I had to grow into that character. I felt like you did. Just like, what do they got? You can't even understand him. He's talking as a mumbler.
Right. I mean, it's almost as grating on your on
intelligence,
on your intelligence and your sense of desire to see. If you're going to do something theatrical, do it well. It reminds me of when George Clooney was made Batman. That was really bad. You know what I'm saying?
Well, what they tried to do is they tried to make that character role emulate the good old boys that were part of NASA and astronauts at the time, Southern accents and the whole deal.
Yeah, but interestingly enough, with like sort of a time shift on it, because it wasn't like the NASA of the 80s or the NASA of the 90s. No. They were putting him clearly, squarely into the box of like the 1960s imagery of the NASA astronaut. Of course, being a test pilot. And again, the mannerisms, the hairstyle, his all of that stuff, basically, is he's meant to be a complete like throwback who is out of step, let's just say, with the current times and everything else.
The epitome of retro.
Yeah, the epitome of retro. That's a good way to put it. Right. I was searching for a way to say it. You got it. That's exactly what it was like. And I noticed that with a lot of the characters that somebody took a lot of time to plant this sort of subtle, very soft programming into the expected, the imagery that was meant to be evoked by it, and also the secondary, the story behind the story, the subtext of the visual image as well as the subtext of the script. So this is one of those things that was extremely well thought out, is I guess my overall point. But I'm sorry. Back to it. I mean, you have the callbacks to Hitler. Basically, you have the use of the Red Scare and the idea of the Russian cosmonaut, and in fact the oppositional authoritarian Russian sort of thing being tweaked into there, as well as the narrative, like I said, about conspiracy theorists versus the authority, and who actually is telling the truth, and who's utilizing a bigger lie to cover up the smaller lie, and so on and so forth. And meanwhile, it's an intelligent little girl who is willing to buck that system based on the fact that her very retro daddy is not in line with falling, completely lockstep with the state. So interesting that, of course, he's the guy that they wind up choosing to utilize as the main protagonist. But anyway, I totally interrupted everything you were saying there, but I thought it was interesting, that's for sure. And I really want you to now. I just want to point out to the audience that it's not just an occult thing, but there's all sorts of subtext interlocked here.
Well, there is, and if you don't mind, I'll try to get into some of the elements that actually have tentacles to other films that came out, such as Contact, Transformers, the very first one that came out in 2007.
Mm-hmm.
And those films had to do with stargates, wormholes, passages from our neck of the woods to Vega in particular.
Mm-hmm.
That happened in Contact. If you remember, they built a machine. It was an alien machine. They didn't know what it was for. They took a risk in building it. It could have been something that would destroy Earth, or it would be an asset to humanity. And of course, it turns out to be an asset to humanity, a transport system. Back in the 1970s, there's an astrophysicist named Kip, K-I-P, Thorne, T-H-O-R-N-E.
Right.
And he theorized that we have a near-Earth wormhole. And this is reality now. What was he, out of MIT? I have to kind of look back and see where he's...
One of those types of organizations, and I guess we should be careful to make sure that we market for the audience where we're going from the film back to, the current world, so to speak, you know what I mean? Because it's kind of funny how it's sort of going to blur together here.
Well, they used Kip Thorne in Interstellar. They used his theories, his formulas, in order to build a three-dimensional model of the black hole, because that's what this film Interstellar was about, black hole, and passages to the black hole.
Right.
And so forth. And so it's just going back to the original films that were sort of chronicling this. And it gets very complex, very detailed, but I'll try to brush over, like the...
Well, let's put it this way, okay, so we don't get too bogged down, because I know we spent a lot of time now talking about this film, and everybody's probably wondering, what is this, the film review hour? No, that's not what we're going to do. But it is an analysis, and you got to speak to some of this, being that not everybody has seen the film and so on. So let me sort of just throw the story forward in the film, and we'll begin to connect it and understand that, of course, a lot of the precursors to what is, being exhibited in this film and through this narrative are, quite diversely spread through previous works. So you have plenty of groundwork for this. And what happens is this guy that I was telling you about, who was this test pilot, who winds up finding NASA because the ghost showed him, through this message, which turns out is in binary, so on and so forth. He winds up finding NASA, and they actually want to use him as a pilot to leave the planet, because, one of the great options is to abandon the planet and find a new home. And because of the wormhole that you referenced, they actually might have a chance of not, having to live 4 generations to get there. They have a new sort of propulsion system, which, of course, has been hinted about and talked about, in alternative energy communities for, decades that I know about. These types of possibilities and these types of scientific realities are intertwined with the fictional story, right? So that's all interesting. And of course, there's, sort of a human interest thing that accompanies it. Obviously, it's not all about the science and space. You've got to have the protagonist, the antagonist, the wild card who, flips sides at one point or another and everything else. Without spoiling the movie entirely, let's just say that all that is also included. But here's where we get into strangeness, because there's sometimes a little more reality in fiction than there is, reality in reality. So let's go from there, talking about a little bit about the groundwork that came before it, maybe. But I don't want to linger on that too long, because then we're going to get into the great point, and then I want to have time to move on to something else as well.
Okay.
So, yeah.
Well, then just real quickly, it wasn't long ago when George Bush Jr. made the statement that they plan on moving people to Mars by 2020, the new space program. They retired the shuttle program, what was it, a couple years ago now, and put Smart Kelly out of job, but he's got something going on. But
Right.
The thing is,
just for clarification,
film,
one second, Lee. Just for clarification for the listeners, I'm not taking phone calls right now, but keep listening. I will take phone calls shortly. Okay, so stop ringing the phone. Probably in the second hour, after we've laid out a few things more succinctly, we'll actually take phone calls if Lee's up for it. Okay. Sorry, Lee. Go right ahead.
No, that's fine. The fact is that if you've noticed, and I'm sure your listeners have noticed, articles coming out in the newspapers, and then we have television programming from the Discovery Channel and National Geographic. They're looking for possible worlds that humanity can flee to when the you-know-what hits the fan here on planet Earth. They illustrated that pretty well in this film, where, farming is degrading down to nothingness, and all you have is genetically modified corn left, a dust bowl. The whole world is becoming a dust bowl. And they're looking and searching for a new place for human beings to go to. But they're fictionalizing even that, because there is a plan to move people to Mars. At least that's my opinion, based on what I've heard, in mainstream. And George Bush saying that, well, that's as mainstream as he can get.
Right. I mean, we saw the whole thing about the lottery for, people to be able to go there and everything else. I mean, that came out a few months ago. I thought that was odd.
Oh, yeah.
that was just sort of dropped out there as sort of a non sequitur. Oh, by the way, we're thinking about, selecting people to go to Mars. And of course, these things are often talked about in the, what people often call the UFO community or the ufology community, and so on and so forth. And these things are always speculated about. And of course, to have another place to go is a fairly rational plan if you assume that the Earth could be destroyed and is being destroyed. And, we can argue all day about what the real conditions are. But the fact is that it's not too unrealistic an idea that we could be faced with a dust bowl and, with the consequences of genetically modified crap. We could be faced with, stuff that doesn't even resist the other genetically modified crap, which is destroying our food supply as we speak. So it's really the sort of looking down the road with an educated guess almost. And therefore it seems like you should be rooting for them to want to go to another planet, because, we're already screwed here. And some people think that now, but at this point in the movie scenario, they definitely are.
Well, they're grooming us to think that it would be an ideal place. And they're doing that with the kids.
Mm-hmm.
There was an animated film by Disney called Mars Needs Moms, and that was for the kiddies, so that when they turn 18, military age, or, they go to, let's say, Mars, because I think that's what they're really talking about, although they're fictionalizing a way, way distant not universe, but galaxy far, far away, when really it's in our solar system, to the next viable planet.
Oh,
because they did that, and I'll tell you that, Charles, this will interest you, I think. The film, well, let's talk about John Carter real quick. I won't belabor it, but that came a year after this animated film, Mars Needs Moms, when it was deemed a box office flop. why would they do another film on Mars? Well, they're intriguing the older generation kids to think that they have superhuman powers because the gravity is a little bit less on Mars. And so if you saw that, you'd see that that would be enticing for them. It's like, wow, let's go over there and be superheroes. But
Well,
then
right,
the
and it's also a good way to sort of entice kids to normalize things in their minds. Like my big argument about why was there all of a sudden plenty of these, wonderful toy helicopters and things a few years back. It was to get us ready for the fact that they were going to roll out and make it very common the idea that these drones were going to be floating around. So
exactly.
therefore, toy helicopters are fun. They crash real easy. They're also not very durable, so they're not meant to be a big threat. They're just meant to look like toys. And really, to a kid thinking about little machines flying around, well, that's kind of normal. It's just like the toys I had when I was a kid. And this is the kind of thing that is being done here, except, it's obviously an even bigger issue than drones. But in order to normalize drones, you give them toys to play with, which makes things a whole lot more normal. And
And it's
so
for
on.
the kids.
And it's for the kids, right?
Now, do you recall at the beginning of Interstellar when they bring down that Indian drone?
Oh, yes, exactly.
Okay,
That's why I brought it up, actually, because I was tying it together. But
you're going to put it together.
yep.
Well,
Go, but you go ahead.
do you recall the concern that the little girl, the daughter, has? Her name is Murph, by the way. Probably after Murphy's Law, whatever could go wrong will.
Right,
Murph
which they do make a point of in the film, by the way.
asked the father to let it go. And then he puts up a reason why he's taking the internal navigation system out of it. And then she says, it's not hurting anybody. Now, before they bring that drone down, the father gives the laptop to the little girl so that she can operate it. What they're doing is they're grooming the viewer of the film to think that it's okay to allow children to operate drones when they become of military age.
Well, not only that, but it's like a fun thing, that daddy might give to his little girl. Hey, look, you can play with the little drone just with the touch of your finger.
Yeah, and with her comment, she says, it's not doing any harm.
And that's the other thing is, hey, there's nothing wrong with these things flying around. Whatever they're doing, they're not doing anything. So, of course, again, acquiescence, the attitude of normalization, that being introduced that way. And like I said, if you look at the real world, the toy helicopters and all that make perfect sense, having been a big fad, coming out of seemingly nowhere because they were getting us ready, and they're still getting us ready. And if there's tons of these things in the sky, it'll be less disturbing to somebody who is, like my son's age right now, as we speak, because he's 10 months old. For him, if it's always been in the cartoons and it's always been something that looks like fun and everything else,
then it's acceptable.
Then it's acceptable to him. Whereas to me, it's kind of disturbing that there's these little unmanned things flying around. So, perfect point, right? And like
nobody
I said,
will be a cat. Oh, I'm sorry.
And like I said, it's multifaceted what's going on in this movie. It's not one simple, direct sort of point on the agenda. It's multiple points on the greater agenda. So now I'll try and restrain myself and shut up while you go into this, because I really want the listener to hear what you have to say.
Well, the Indian drone brings up a really good question. And I had to kind of think this one out and then realize what it was. And I'd like to get your opinion, actually, see if I'm on it or not. Out of all the different countries that could have represented that drone, or that drone represented, why India? Why did they choose another country? Why didn't they choose countries that are already occupied in the past 5-10 years? Why India? Can you give a good...
Well, to me, there's no simple answer to that, and I'll tell you why. First of all, India is not thought of to be one of those military powers. So it adds to the, this is an innocuous thing argument, in the American mindset, mind you. So India is not thought of to be one of the, the points of conflict that we need to worry about as Americans, first of all. Okay? Second of all, with a lot of the outsourcing and things that have gone on, and with the communications and things like that have gone on over the past couple of decades, India is one of those base places where you have, a guy there telling you how to handle, how to handle building your shelf or whatever, or how to solve your software problems because, he's answering 6 different companies' phones lines in India, right? So it could be an innocuous communication thing. It's all about, to me, putting it like just adding to the idea that it's a harmless thing. It's not a problem because there's no sort of nefarious connection that can be drawn to India from the general national perspective.
How about if you look at it as a logistics move,
Okay.
just based on war and logistics and world dominion?
That's a great centralized point
Right.
for, that would be an excellent staging point for a wide variety of possibilities.
Well, here's one, if you don't mind. I'll just interject this and see what happens. I think I actually mentioned it when we were on together at another show. I'm looking at Saudi Arabia.
Okay.
And I question this. I don't know if anybody else does. Is why didn't the United States get involved in a takeover of some sort with that parcel, very huge parcel of land, which is a peninsula and could be considered a continent in to itself. If you think of it, it's huge. And it's got the 7 Emirates there. What we have been involved in all these decades is consuming other parcels of land, real estate that surround it. The eastern countries of Africa are destitute.
Mm-hmm.
Purposely done so, just like they did with Mexico south of the border of, the United States,
right,
to create a condition in which it could not have power to overtake this country. But back there in the Middle East, you have Iraq, Iran, Pakistan, and all these countries that border north of Saudi Arabia.
right.
And then more east of that, you have one of the countries that isn't completely under control, we'll say, and that happens to be India. That they wouldn't in the film say that drone comes from Iraq or Iran or even some of the northern countries that we went into, Libya of Africa.
Mm-hmm.
See, I'm looking at it as to why they would, I wouldn't call it target that country, but associate that country with that drone. So
Well,
the answer then would be, and it's just of my opinion, and then I'll let you take over from there, is that maybe that's the next country that we're going to be going into during the next presidency.
Well, my problem with that is that they haven't laid the groundwork for their justification to do so. Pakistan, which is, been and somebody made this point in the chat room that it's an artificial separation that occurred there between Pakistan and India. That realistically, that Pakistan, is effectively still part of India in a lot of ways, but has been divided from it, right? I think that was a move in order to keep that population at bay. To allow a national separation there and all that. But that's a deeper subject, mind you. India is one of those countries which is, again, just never been part of the threat scenarios. So I'm wondering how they would. I would find it extremely unique if they could sell that one to the American public and sell that justification for, once again engaging in some sort of invasion. For me, and I've said this several times, I have always believed that we will not see an honest declaration of the Third World War until the African theater has been thrown into disarray. I believe that that's where it's going to come from because of all the long-standing conditions and, the manipulation of, entire nations' economies to pit them in certain positions, et cetera, et cetera. But based on that, the fact that there are plenty of natural resources there, and still a significant population to be toyed with, for me, that would be the thing that would, get us into that declaration of a wider conflict. I'm wondering, so my counterpoint, which is really more of a question, is how do you think that they could possibly justify that, not only to the American people, but on a world stage to go after India?
My only thought on that would be, well, they pose a problem because they're overpopulated, so let's do something about it, which would be absurd, of course.
Well,
But they
that
would,
could be, yeah, that could be an underlying agenda, right? But what would be the public pronouncements, like Afghanistan, as ridiculous as it was, retaliation for 9/11. Iraq, it was, well, he's got weapons that he might use on everybody.
yeah.
You know,
Well, here would be the weapon that they would use,
sure.
and that would be to stage a condition in which people are coming down with some whatever disease, and then they would have to contain them for some reason. They would have to, what's the word for it?
Quarantine.
Quarantine. Thank you. And that would be kind of like another way to war against a country or occupying it, let's say. But that's just sort of like out there. But
So
look at what we've been talking about with the Ebola scare and just all this nonsense.
Well, sure. So from a standpoint of how they would justify it, you think it might be more of a public pronouncement of, for humanitarian reasons, we need to contain a particular disease, or possibly even chaos from a natural disaster, which India takes the brunt of quite often. You have a lot of flooding that, I mean, not so that the American people notice, but there's been a lot of flooding and earthquakes and things like that, which have caused a serious disruption in the population. That's for certain.
Yeah.
So
it's not even other countries that they're trying to convince. It's just they have to sell the American people on it. That's all they have to do in order to achieve their goal and their agenda.
Well, yeah, but some justification is usually put out there. I mean, it's always BS, but I mean, there's always a reason to create an international force, like our hysterically funny coalition of the willing regarding Iraq, and all that. There's always got to be some sort of reason why we have to get our skin in the game, and India is one of those things that I think is a little hard unless there's something I'm not seeing to sort of justify it from a public standpoint. The fact that they'd want to control the population, or the fact that there are natural resources there to be exploited, or that they wish to, create like an expansive sort of Chinese, slave traded, even more intense than what we imagine the communist structure to be situation over there, as a matter of creating an even bigger enemy, which of course, land mass and population, both, they would be extremely large to deal with. But the thing is, like, I'm wondering what would be that trigger to get there. I mean, what is that public justification?
And maybe it isn't just to get there. It's to already have them. They created an English-speaking country.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that's one of their main languages, right? And that they've already acquired, I guess, that. So it's an alliance that they are just even making more stable is really all it is. So it wouldn't be an occupation of the country. It would just be
But
holding it. Because I'm looking at Saudi Arabia as the headquarters for the New World Order. That was the point that I was making. They want to make sure that there's an established, cordoned off belt of countries that we see having been taken over, occupied, or whatever, that surround that peninsula, that massive land.
Oh, yeah. Coming from that standpoint, it makes perfect sense. I mean, after all, we're well aware, even with what's, easily publicly accessible, regarding the corporate interests convening with Saudi Arabia, the always interesting interaction with our military and military associated assets, and the intermingling with Saudi Arabia, and of course Saudi Arabia comes up a lot. It's a very convenient place to be able to deal with that entire region, so on and so forth. And of course, India would be a good strategic thing to have, but I wonder, they're going to require some sort of justification for, for quashing the American empire coming in there after they've already lived through the colonialist style way that the British were in there. And, the public opinion on the planet is also somewhat significant, not as big a part of the reason for creating these storylines as convincing the American public that they need to send their sons and daughters, that we need to spend trillions of dollars, and so on and so forth. But I hate to say this, but I can't even imagine the justification that, the false flag that would need to be developed. I don't even see the groundwork for it.
I agree with you.
I'm wondering what it would be that they could create. I mean, the humanitarian angle is a possibility, right? Because that gives you a convenient excuse to utilize military assets, to lovingly help our, friends around the world, as we often do. And if you didn't detect the, hint of, forget hint, the extreme amount of sarcasm in that, sorry, but it was extremely sarcastic, because usually when there's a humanitarian mission taken on by the military-industrial complex of this country, there is always the hidden agenda attached to it. But, the hidden agendas, I have no argument. I mean, India would be a wonderful jewel to have regarding the ongoing conflicts in that part of the world in general. But I'm just, wondering how it is they would pass it along. And is it something that we haven't already seen yet? Or do you think they're going to seize upon, the humanitarian thing and then let it morph into another problem?
Interesting how they make problems out of nothing, huh?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. I mean, to notice, we're not talking about legitimate situations that necessarily require the assistance of a world power or superpower or whatever it is we're supposed to be, even though, our credit cards seem to be getting turned down a little more often nowadays. Things like that. But the reality is, they're still going to need that justification. And based on the fact that there's no groundwork for that justification, I find it hard to believe that they would go right into India directly. So I'm just wondering, what it is you think there, because I'd love to hear something that, like I said, that I haven't thought of.
Well, maybe there could be a tie-in into this Jade Helm thing. You kind of wanted to discuss a little bit of that.
Oh, absolutely, yeah.
That, why is that in the Southwest? What are they doing? What are they preparing for? What are they training for? There are just a whole load of questions behind that.
Mm-hmm. No, there's a whole lot more questions than answers. But, like I've said many times, I still don't believe it's time to hit the panic button regarding this, because I don't think it's the great endgame play that people think it is.
Right.
It is definitely an intelligence collection operation, but those go on all the time. The more sort of intellectually sound idea that they may do something immediately after the 2016 election, of significance on a domestic level, to me is a whole lot more sensible. Because you can read the old patterns to determine, where they're going. If you ever notice, in the first year of a lot of these allegedly transitional, administrations coming in, you'll find the significant events that are often sort of cast aside as, well, the new guy didn't really do it. The old guy isn't here anymore, so we can't blame them.
Right.
So you have this sort of political plausible deniability in the public's mind, just long enough to confound them so that it falls down the memory hole. So that's what I see. So if there's going to be a significant event domestically, you're looking at 2017, not this summer. Is it something to be kept an eye on? Absolutely. Are there weird things going on? Absolutely. But tying that back to the Indian thing, right? it's still hard for me to imagine. I mean, there's more of a justification for them to use military force on American soil at this point than there would be on Indian soil, because, on the world stage, they could say that domestic unrest is growing out of control. They could say that, between that and the fact that we have all of these radicalized Westerners exaggerate the numbers and talk about, ISIS recruits coming out of every high school, something like that, and maybe not that ridiculous, but then again, maybe, they could justify the utilizing of, like I said, our own military domestically, because they have some of that groundwork. But India is a weird thing, because we've never, even when they've done things that are questionable, nefarious, a little bit rough, whatever else, generally speaking, it hasn't been introduced to the population as one of those combative nations that's a danger zone. You know what I'm saying? Now, Pakistan, on the other hand, you get a little bit of both. But Pakistan doesn't have the territory, doesn't have the population that India does, even though they're virtually the same people. You know what I'm saying? So the takeover of that big piece, or the injection, let's just say, of military force from the American side, is wholly unjustifiable. However, like you said, with the humanitarian idea, maybe in conjunction with another tsunami, or maybe in conjunction with another earthquake, something else broke out. They're battling with Pakistan over Kashmir, as they have been doing silently now, as far as the world stage is concerned, for a long time, right? You could say that they're at odds with them. They're about to go nuclear, because of all the chaos, and we need to step in. That's the best scenario I can draw. I was kind of hoping that actually you had a better one, because mine's got a lot of holes in it, but at least, there's some coherent, some coherent basis to my speculation, I think. Maybe I'm completely cracked. You go ahead and tell me.
Well, mine's got a lot of holes in it, too. Just brought them up for contemplation. There's always somebody out there that could probably call in with a really good definitive rationale behind it, or to negate it. Also, I'm the type of person that likes to be debunked. I never want to be right about anything.
No, because you actually learn more from somebody who comes at you with an intellectually sound argument, which is contrary to your own. First of all, you can either, reassess and strengthen your original argument based on the fact that you weren't anticipating that particular disagreement, or you can go back and refine your views, learn something, and you do have the right to change your mind.
Sure, and there are things that I miss. And there are the people out there that are expert in areas that I'm not.
Mm-hmm.
And or know a little bit more history in areas that I don't know.
Right, and unless you're Google, you can't possibly know everything, right?
Exactly.
Another little, sarcastic joke of mine. Sorry, Lee.
Yeah, but Google is confounding too, because I don't know, most people would tend to kind of believe something that they read off bat without even researching where the source comes from, and so they kind of go on that tidbit of information thinking that it's real, and then all subsequent research that they do just follows along the wrong trail.
Mm-hmm.
Which is, I'm the type of person that likes to get to the source, talk to the people that put it out there.
Right, get as close to the core of the reality as you can. That's for certain, and of course, verify and double verify and triple verify along the way, because corroboration is your best friend when you're trying to prove a point. But anyway, I'm sorry, we kind of bogged down into the whole India thing there, but that's me. So my fault. Don't anybody else blame Lee for this. Moving forward, though, you have the situation with the Indian drone. Okay. Whatever that means, but still all of those other points about normalization and this stuff being integrated into the storyline is definitely fascinating. But let's take people, a little bit away from the fictional, and bring them into how it is, okay, so Chuck and Lee, what the hell does this have to do with the real world? It's a movie. Okay. let's start to talk about the stuff that they're actually tying together into nice little packages. Sorry, you still there?
Yeah, no, I'm here.
Oh, okay. What I'm saying is let's start to tie together from the from the point in the story. We have this thing that I've kind of laid out, and it winds up to a space travel, and we've definitely given everybody the premise of the movie very solidly. But outside of the fact that we do have the ability to maybe see that this is a reasonable estimation of our future regarding the crops, the idea that that people could be moved off planet in order to preserve the human race. Things like this have been bandied about for a long time, but this stuff doesn't just tie to those particular speculative points. It actually ties to some other realities as well.
Okay, well, let's take a look at the film itself and what they did. They set it up as if we're darned if we do and we're darned if we don't. If we don't find a way off this planet, everybody here is doomed. And they do not tell Murph's father, who plays the pilot, that he cannot return. So basically he goes, and that's the end of his family life here on Earth. And they don't tell him that everybody's doomed on Earth. So you've got to take these cryogenically preserved embryos, or whatever they were, to regenesis a new world with human beings, with human life.
Well, right. So,
right?
In fairness, though, let's just give him the rest of that story because we didn't give it to him. In fairness, here's what happens. Because he's called out on that mission, he's told that there are actually two possibilities of saving the human race. So we are faced with starvation and destruction on the planet. Okay. That is something that's a possibility, but if you get your job done and we keep working on things here, we might be able to take a significant population, or maybe everybody off the planet, to the new home world. Okay, so there's your hopeful thing, but it's really a dangling carrot which is left there, because the truth about the mission is that he's meant to go out there and just reseed a new planet with these cryogenically preserved embryos that they've grown and created, with all, genetic diversity in mind and all that kind of stuff, right? So the idea is that the greater science, again, the unnatural sort of science, is going to be the savior of the race, but you have to leave your personal connections and your family behind and all that. So that's part of the story as well. And at the end, it kind of turns a little different and becomes, sort of an interesting mind bender, really. But that part of the story is where we're talking about here, where, he has the option to leave. He does leave, but he's thinking that he's going to come back in like 20 years and stuff like that. But it turns out that wasn't it. And of course, the scientific, the technocratic bureaucracy lying to the people that it needs to utilize to get the job done. What a shock there. But of course, this kind of ties into real stuff, doesn't it?
Now, what do you think about who they were when Dr. Brand he's questioned, what is the purpose of this mission? And Dr. Brand says, well, talks about an entity that they refer to as they. Now, they never say the word alien, but it's my firm belief that that's what they're referring to. Mm. However, the film is sort of kind of like a poltergeist. Those that have seen the film see how the daughter and the father are, or how's it? That they're ghosts behind the library of books.
Right. So to explain this, to explain this sort of what we're getting at here is that they're given the idea that the instructions of how to deal with this wormhole, which is close to our planet, but happens to be near Saturn, of course, which is symbolic in and of itself. The fact is that the ships are supposed to go through this wormhole, and they're supposed to be able to come back and everything else. And these instructions were all given for people to by some entity which is communicating with them from within the wormhole and all of that, right? It's all given to them by a group of beings or an entity that they cannot name, cannot see, but they do know they're being communicated with. And this is what has sent them on this journey to scout out these new worlds, right? So that's kind of the weird part of the story too. And of course, it turns out that the individuals that are signaling here, because of this library and the poltergeist disturbance with the books, that's where that part of the story comes in. Okay. So what I think about that, or what it seems to imply, although the implication throughout the movie is that you're supposed to expect that this is an alien species who has sent this either across time, across the universe, or both, is actually, and they do describe they're fifth dimensional beings, and they're communicating with us from another realm which is different from our own. So communication is difficult, and so on and so forth. And that's kind of fascinating. But meanwhile, like I said, it winds up tying back together with the little girl and her ghost, which she was keeping data on and all that, and she was supposed to do that in order to even have the discussion with her father regarding it, right? Lee? I'm not sure if you're muted there, sir. I can't hear you. Okay, I may have lost Lee here again. I'm not sure. If you can hear me, though, you might be muted or might have pulled out your microphone or something. But, there I hear noise. Is that you, Lee?
Yeah, can you hear me now?
Now I hear you. Okay. Sorry. Just all of a sudden I stopped and you weren't talking. I said, oops, maybe I lost him again, and I saw you were still there. So, did you hear the part I was talking about? Lee? Huh. Okay. Well, as I said, in the story.
Can you hear me now?
Now I can, yes.
Okay. I don't know what's going on.
All right. Well, did you hear what I was saying?
Yeah, I could hear you talking, but you weren't able to hear me.
Right. So at this point, we're just sort of giving people an idea of the story, what's happening, and of course, this communication is from this fifth dimensional entity or entities, who knows. And meanwhile, the parallel is that much earlier on in the story, the little girl has been communicating with this poltergeist and keeping track of what's going on, collecting data on the situation, these communications, so on and so forth. And of course, when he goes through this wormhole, ends up in a time scenario where he doesn't age, but many years go by over the course of an hour. I think it's something like 7 years per hour or something like that, right?
Yeah.
So you have these concepts of time and how time is bent and spent and changed based on different conditions, and gravity, which I found kind of funny. Gravity is the prevailing force, as it were, over a lot of these conditions. But anyway, back to it. How does that relate to the real world as we go through the story?
I don't know how to answer that, other than what I noted was that if there was an alien entity that was creating the condition by which the father could communicate with his daughter using the binary language, that it was left to them to figure it out. They weren't given any instructions, so it was human intelligence that was creating the condition by which a communication could be established. And
Right.
That's how his daughter figured it out, was not through an intelligence intervention. It was human power, so to speak. And therefore I raised the question, was it the intention of the filmmakers to lead us to believe that we're going to be protected on our own wit alone? Or do we have to be just as sharp as the characters played in the movie? I don't know where that leads to, but I always question, what do audiences think when they leave these so-called fiction films? Because I really firmly believe that they're rooted in fact. I talked to Andrew Basiago a lot, who well, we get into some of. Do you know who Andrew Basiago is?
The name is familiar to me, but I couldn't for the life of me tell you who he is off the top of my head.
Okay, he makes the claim that he was part of Project Pegasus back at the late was it the late '60s, and that
Oh,
he
okay.
did the time travel and was presented forward and backward in time,
Okay.
and that there's a story behind that. It's very well known in the alternative, independent, news and information, and that he has been to Mars through these technologies that they were experimenting with after Montauk, or it was a part of Montauk. And just because there's a possibility that what he's telling is the truth, I had to get connected with him and learn as much as I could because of the scope of the research that I done on Hoover Dam and the possibility that it could be a Earth-based gateway to that near-Earth wormhole that we're seeing in these films today, including the one that we're talking about tonight. Interesting. I'm asked this question all the time. What HARP is for? What's its purpose?
Mm.
And typically what we get are the, and I'm just throwing this in because I don't want to forget in case it does interest you. Most of us understand it as the technologies that have been presented.
Right.
Even in the mainstream now, they talked about it a little bit. But in our neck of the woods, HARP is detrimental to our ionosphere. It's used to control people. It just all these variety of things. But because we were talking about the Russians and the importance of Russian intelligence at the beginning of your show tonight, it's the Russians that actually pinpointed and know what the main purpose of the High Active Auroral Research Project, which is known as HARP,
Mm-hmm.
is primarily for. And
Right.
that,
Well, but before we go much further into HARP, I just want to say this: the capper on the story regarding Interstellar is that it does seem to me as though they presented it as we have the answers already in our hands. We just need to to sort of make them more sophisticated and kind of refine them. And once we refine them, then we will find the mechanism by being able to disseminate that information across time, because time becomes irrelevant when certain conditions prevail, etc., etc. So it's sort of a complex way of saying we have all the answers. And I wonder if the audience takes that away. I think they do. I think we're meant to, because it's meant to sort of bolster the hubris of the general public that, no matter what, all things are okay. And even if we destroy the planet, we'll be able to figure it out and we'll be able to continue on, while at the same time disconnecting from the reality that means that, realistically speaking, although some form of progeny will exist elsewhere, the human race ends up extinct. You destroy an entire field of corn, and you happen to plant some of the corn, in another field. That field of corn is still dead. Just because their offspring continue on elsewhere, it's not quite the same thing as continuing on the race in general on the planet we live on now. So I think that was the overall kind of finisher to that. To go back into HARP, though, this is something that when you were discussing this with me briefly off the air, I got to be honest with you, it's one of those things I never really heard about, because HARP to me has always been presented as one of these things that's extremely dangerous, regarding the fact that it upsets the equilibrium on the biosphere. It causes all sorts of disruptions, and it's a wonderful weapon. It can be utilized to control populations. It can shift weather patterns, but I've always said to myself that there is probably a great deal more that can be done with HARP than even the most unhinged person has ever presented out there. So, go right on ahead with your explanation. I mean, you're just giving people the meaning, the actual meaning of the of HARP. But the fact that you're tying it back to the Russians and everything else, this is going to be interesting. So please go ahead.
Okay, well, let's give it a shot. Now, I are you there?
Yeah, I just
Yeah.
muted, so I would promise myself I'd be quiet.
Oh, gotcha. Okay, I for myself, when I learned of all the different various ways HARP, can take an action, uh, as you listed them, I don't know why, but it just didn't fit with me. I don't understand the technology as well as scientists would in electromagnetic fields and so forth. But what I do know is that it's sort of the reverse of a radio antenna. Instead of broadcasting out from a center, and then you have a 360-degree fear of rays going out, what HARP is a concentrated beam.
Mm-hmm.
And then they could point that anywhere. And I thought, well, how can you control if it's going upward into space? How can you how can you control something that's happening on the landmass or the atmosphere just above it? Now, these were questions that I had only because I wasn't understanding the technology at the time. And when I did my research and found the Russian documentary that talks about a lot of things, but also includes their whistleblowers were talking about the primary purpose as being, and here it is, a method by which they could track the entryway into this Kip Thorne's logic behind it being the entrance into near-Earth wormhole, which would not necessarily be a Stargate, but a gate to a Stargate, that's what HARP was set up to do. And that they have other facilities as well, like in China and the other places where they have it, so that they could track and locate this thing that's moving around all the time. It's not in a stationary place, it's been theorized.
Oh,
So,
right. Maybe we should give sort of an ABC explanation for those who, aren't real familiar and maybe weren't great devotees of Star Trek. Maybe we should sort of, if you don't mind, sort of explain how you understand what a wormhole is to begin with.
I think it's exactly the way we saw it in the film Contact with Jodie Foster.
Mm.
They might have been pretty accurate with the way it works. Also in Interstellar, very similar, but not quite exactly. And then other films that have depicted these gateways in which they go from one destination to another. So, is that where you were wanting me to go to, or?
Well, I just figured we should sort of give people, if they're hearing the term wormhole, and like I said, they've never watched any of these movies or never watched Star Trek or something because that's where I first heard of the idea of a wormhole.
Yeah, me too.
Was watching Star Trek: The Next Generation, and of course that's a real sort of cursory explanation of what it could be. In the basic idea is that it is a distortion in time and space, right? Which means that you could transcend greater amounts of distance by virtue of this particular distortion or multiple points together in this distortion. And the nature of it has been argued about and discussed, and there's a lot of stuff on it and would take us a very long time to thoroughly explain everything about it. But the idea is that, say it takes 10,000 light years to get somewhere, based on, traveling at the speed of light. It take us 10,000 years to get somewhere. Well, the construction of a wormhole is such that one could get there in, 10 minutes because of this sort of warp, this sort of overlap in space that occurs. It's almost like I've heard it described as like a knot in a blanket. which is really a poor way of describing it, but it's sort of a way to visualize how a distortion could come about if you knotted together the catty-cornered corners of a blanket. Now you get from one end of the blanket to the other instantly, but once the knot is undone, it would take you a little longer to, say, drag a stick from one end of the blanket to the other, whereas you could just simply hit it if it was knotted together. Again, not completely scientifically accurate, but it gives them an idea of what a wormhole is in the first place. So the idea that we could travel to other galaxies, which are very far away, which would have these greater planets, is, or acceptable planets to live on, is presented to you as being accessible via this wormhole, so that we don't have to live 8 generations on a spaceship to travel there at the speed of light. This kind of thing. I just felt like it was a good idea to sort of give an idea of what we meant when we were saying wormhole. But anyway, the HARP being utilized to track, examine, or even possibly manipulate some of the characteristics of the wormhole is a use that I had honestly never heard of until you started talking to me about it.
Yeah, and I never heard of it until I came across that documentary either. And really what they were talking about was what happened after 1945 when Nazi Germany took their scientific research to Antarctica and various other places.
Mm-hmm.
And they kind of stuck that in there, but it was striking to hear that, because I'd never heard it here in the United States, and any documentaries that people have put out, or their white papers, their whatever it was. But it made sense to me, because it tied in a lot of things that I had questioned. It's just like, okay, if it's true what they're saying, it makes logical sense of the things that I had been, and not just in film, but in other areas of research.
Mm-hmm. Well, we see this resonant effect of Operation Paperclip throughout the scientific and and corporate community in our country. And I always have to add the caveat that really, it wasn't us obtaining these foreign entities. It was really more of us reobtaining or getting a collection of interest on our original investment. Really, when all these guys were brought back here for various reasons. There's individuals that wound up integrated into the intelligence community, wound up working for NASA. Psychology and psychiatry as it stands now would not be the same way worldwide had we not grabbed up some of these guys, right? There's always something to this. And of course, I think we still have yet to discover really exactly how much influence Operation Paperclip has played into our current situation. So, and this is one of those things, and I've heard about this stuff with Antarctica before, but again, it's one of those things that I could never really lay my hands on the most solid evidence that I wanted to be able to tell that story coherently.
Uh-huh.
But anyway, so HARP being utilized to track the wormhole, but it's also got the other uses as well, right? I mean, it's not just for that, I think.
I don't know. I basically kind of listen to what's being put out there. I read what's put out there. And because I've never been there and I haven't talked to anybody that will whistleblow on it, I just have to base my opinion on what the general consensus is.
Right. And the evidence...
I'll tell you, when I hear a twist like what we shared tonight, it opens up a new door. It just makes me think deeper. It's not like I want to prove or disprove HARP.
Right.
I want to be able to prove what the intent is for the future and what's going on. Because if I just continue discussing the surface issues and what might happen and what these black projects really are, like what's beyond the weather modification program and chemtrails, I've known things that are not discussed anywhere. And I talked to Michael Murphy about that, and George Griffin, who produced films, there are 2 films on chemtrails, and they're basically cross-eyed on that because it's all brand new. It's concepts,
Hmm.
but they don't jump it further because it's very difficult to convey these ideas to the general public. They can only take a certain amount in small bites.
Right. And
Otherwise,
I've had Michael Murphy on this show, and it is a much easier sort of thing to accept, in one's mind regarding HARP and chemtrails, because the aluminum and the metals that are that seem to be present in all of this chemtrail geoengineering, crap sandwich that's being fed to us. All of that's going on, right? Seems to be, it's just a sort of a no-brainer that would be tied into this great electromagnetic project, and maybe that's what the actual purpose would be, is to be some sort of governing, um, control mechanism over that entire program, something like that. That seems a whole lot easier to go along with that sort of idea, right? An idea like this seems extremely far-fetched, right?
yeah. Well, when we take a look at the wobble of the Earth
Hmm.
and the fact that they've been talking about polar shifts for quite some time now,
Hmm.
and that the extreme, what is it, the tilt or the wobble is such that it's noted in societies that wouldn't normally look at the internet to find this stuff out. It's like they're seeing it with their own eyes, that there has to be some tie-in or some link to these projects, including HARP and the electromagnetic field shifting or augmentation of it.
Hmm.
I was talking to somebody not long ago that brought up a very interesting, very intriguing actually concept, um, which has to do with the tilt of all the planets in our solar system, and that they have a certain frequency or tone depending on the tilt of the planet. And he explained it very beautifully, but I wish I had it recorded because I can't speak to it as eloquently as he did.
Right.
But it made sense in a way that it deserves investigation. Why is the Earth tilted at 23 or whatever degrees? And the harmonic frequency or the Schumann frequency, which is 7.83 in it,
Hmm.
the hertz, and that we're grounded because of that particular frequency. And if there's any change to it, then it sort of throws us off. But there's like a tone signature to that as well. And because of this wobble or eccentric difference than what the normal used to be, has caused changes.
Well, yeah, I mean, and that's relevant to weather patterns. That's relevant to, the influences on plate tectonics. That's, relevant to a whole lot of things. I mean, the shift in the way that solar storms are received and repelled. The overall, and I forget exactly what it is, but the electromagnetic field, the proper term for it, the electromagnetic field around the planet being tampered with, just seems like one of those ideas that, unless you're extremely educated and surgically precise about it, mankind in general should probably not be screwing with it. You know, this kind of thing goes through my head when we start talking about this stuff. And to me, all of it is relevant, because there's nothing saying that HARP could not be, so multifaceted that nobody's considered that either. That there are so many possible uses for it that it could be literally tied into, everything from, the greater complex idea of climate change, to the influence of the sun being changed on the planet, to, all of the residual effects, like I said, on the plates, on the, the seismic activity that we're seeing, that seem to be aberrations, et cetera, et cetera. All this stuff could be directly tied to it. And also even the psychology of the population could be shifted based on changes in the electromagnetic, landscape, as it were, right?
Mm-hmm.
So all of these things could be relevant. It's just that I had never heard that wormhole thing before. And, before I wind up talking your head off and everything else too much, do you want to take a few phone calls?
Sure, that's fine.
Okay, so now, guys, those who were trying to call in earlier, if you'd like to try and call in, it's 718-717-8296. And we got, 25 minutes or so left. So, if any of the conversation tonight has caused you to have questions or want to make comments, I will add you in as usual. And, however, I will make a statement about that tonight. Let us try to be respectful to this guest, and if you want to attack the host, I'll deal with it. All right? So, there you go. But other than that, feel free to join us in the conversation. Okay. I had to say that because last week was a little rough, Lee, just so you know. Okay. Moving on, though, I mean, is there any other points? I know I've kind of gotten in your way a little bit here and there, but I felt like you were sort of, struggling a little bit to figure out which direction to go in. So if I was a little too intrusive, I apologize, but it's just my way of trying to sort of guide the show along as best I can. And otherwise, what am I doing here,
No, not at all. It's like these are topics that could be ongoing discussions for...
right, and
it doesn't have to happen all in one night. And I'm quite certain there are a lot of people that were lost.
Well, sure, and even me here and there. So, we could always do this again and clarify certain points, if there's particular subjects that people want to hear covered or something that you wanted to get to that you didn't. I'm more than happy to have you on again. So we could always, do this another way, another time, same channel, maybe.
Well, everything ties in together, and while this may seem like an offshoot topic, it really isn't in retrospect with some of the things that I've studied. And if you're interested, we could talk about Hoover Dam in the 2 years that I analyzed that for what it, and it did tie into Jade Helm. We talk about that too. That a clearer picture could be made, just by showing some things that had not ever been told really to the public.
Mm.
And this is stuff that I got into, and don't know how to get out of. I wish I could.
Yeah, well, that is the problem, is once you begin, digging a hole in your yard, it seems as though after a while you find yourself standing in the hole, and then you've got to construct a way to be able to climb in and out of it once in a while, and while you're doing that, the hole is still getting bigger, and so on, and so on, and, this is what happens with any of these sort of deep research subjects, I think. And, before I do forget, because I am a forgetful sucker and forget to watch the clock, you want to tell people where they can get a hold of, not just information on what we talked about tonight, but other things you do, like tell them about what you got up on YouTube and of course about the website and all that?
I have 3 major websites.
3, sorry. I only looked at the one.
Which one was that? Oh, probably one called Dismantle the Beam Project.
That's it, yep.
That's it, okay. And
that's the one I've been on, yeah.
The address I don't like to repeat because it's one that is very forgetful. But if Google search will turn it up, if those 4 words are put in, Dismantle the Beam, as in BEAM, Project.
Right.
It all had to do with Project Bluebeam. Just find out what that thing is all about. The NSA, I believe, actually stopped me from publishing on that, so they didn't give me access privileges for half a year through WordPress. And I don't know whether it's true or not, but it sure kind of looked like it. And I had to develop another website just so that I could continue posting articles and putting out video documentaries on what I was talking about, called N as in Nancy, WOCSI, and that stands for New World Order Crime Scene Investigations.
Mm-hmm.
And on that website, I threw in my black, what do you call it, false flag operation investigations, beginning with the British Petroleum deal, and then really kind of springboarding from the Gabriel Giffords shooting here in Tucson, in which our federal, probably our last honest judge in the country, was assassinated, Judge John McCarthy Roll, and that whole Jared Lee Loughner thing
Hmm.
went into other investigations, which actually included the Aurora shooting in Colorado and
The Batman thing, right?
Batman Theater shooting.
Hmm.
And in that film, they had elements that were tie-in to the kindergarten shooting that took place in Connecticut. Remember the Adam Lanza thing?
Right.
So I was looking into all these cases and
Just
cases that
just for the
happened.
record, I've taken a lot of crap for stating that I believe that shooting actually occurred.
Which
But
one?
the one at Sandy Hook.
Oh, yeah, yeah. They
Uh,
said that it was faked and no shots were ever taken.
right. I've taken a lot of crap for that, and you know what? I still stand by it. I think it happened. I think it was totally misrepresented, not only by the mainstream, but by others far outside of the mainstream. And I think a lot of misunderstanding has been had there, and I think that it's just been poorly reported and poorly understood by the public. So, but to say that it was in, a completely staged, fictitious thing, sorry, I'm not jumping on that bandwagon.
Yeah.
No, no, sorry. I really, every time Sandy Hook comes up, I have to say that.
Yeah, no, it's good that you put your opinion because I tend to agree with you. When I look at something, I analyze it, then I call it an investigation, like an independent investigation.
Hmm.
I don't discriminate ideas, and I don't. I'm skeptical, but I don't let that take me into a biased attitude about who I'm listening to, what stories I'm hearing. I have to take in everything like a sponge would, and then I sort everything out. Sometimes it'll take a week to figure something out. Sometimes it takes years. It took me 4 years to figure one case out, and that was just by looking at everything without objecting to any one idea. It's all, part of the decoding of a puzzle and bringing all the pieces to fit together at some point. And I'm telling you, it's fascinating to find that the simplest route to the solution is always the easiest. It's just always staring us right in the face,
Mm.
right in plain sight. And it could be the most obscure thing. And even to me, sometimes it's almost practically unbelievable. Like, how could it be so simple? So when people say it did happen, or it didn't happen, or it played out this way, no, it played out that way, I take it as a grain of salt.
Mm.
Because if I start jumping on any one way that it's been decided, I could lose it. I could lose the grip on a final analysis that might take place.
Well, here's the thing too: is that simply because you've awakened yourself enough to understand that that the mainstream is lying to you, doesn't mean that you need to accept something simply because it is counter to what the mainstream is telling you. It doesn't mean that okay, we look up at the sky and that there's three of us standing there, you, me, and another guy, and the other guy is always a liar, and he looks up at you and says, hey, listen, the sky is blue today, and you know that I'm not somebody who tries to lie to you, and I tell you it's in fact a misty green, simply because you think that I'm less of a liar than he is, doesn't necessarily mean he's lying to you that time either. You have to take everything on a case-by-case basis, and to assume or to place faith in somebody's reporting is exactly what's gotten us into this mess to begin with, where these individuals have actually made entire structures out of lying to us, and why everything is being sold to us by the same 6 corporations regarding information, and why everything is so scripted, and why a lot of things are actually completely faked, is because we have accepted that appeal to authority. And simply because you choose a different authority doesn't mean that you haven't surrendered your critical thought process all the same. And that's something that I don't know. It's just like a lot of people seem to miss out on. They've decided that they don't want to be in the in the camp with all of the sleepwalkers, but they walk down the road and they stop at the first camp they see, which isn't that one, and decide that this one is okay, and they stop thinking and moving forward, don't they?
Yeah.
And this is always a poor decision. Always keep your head on a swivel, like they used to say. You know what I mean? And then that's where I come down on it. And I am also open to revision of any of my beliefs based on new evidence being presented. So that I'm sorry again.
I thought I was so smart on Photoshop and being able to take out discrepancies in photographs that may have been augmented or passed off as real when they're really fake. And I went to a conference in which there was a guy. His name was what was his name? Mark D'Antonio, and he works in a special effects group, or it's his own. So he's very familiar with photographs, and he was showing the audience various UFO photographs. And one picture, he asked the whole audience what they thought that was. It was like an anomaly in the sky. And all of us basically thought that it was a UFO. It really looked like one. He said, nope, that's a paper clip. And we all looked at us, you're right, it's just a paper clip. Mm. It was when the truth of what that was presented within not even a second, everybody got it.
Right.
Only because our eyes don't always see what is there. We want to kind of make up the story. Just because we're at a UFO conference, it's got to be a UFO.
It's funny that you bring that up, because I once did something very similar with a Polaroid camera. I wanted to photograph this really beautiful full moon, okay, in the sky. That's all I wanted. And I saw that, the best angle I could get on the piece of property that, I was allowed to be on was kind of, part of my view would be obstructed by these, by phone poles and power line poles. Okay, because I lived in New Jersey, so there's power lines over your head everywhere. But anyway, that's where I was, and I take this photograph of this beautiful full moon, right? And it's a Polaroid camera, so you wait for it to develop. Everybody's going to be like, yeah, old man, I never heard of that before. But there was a camera that you used to actually shoot a piece of film out of that would develop right there. Okay, so, before the age of it was all in your phone. So I'm sitting there and I'm letting it dry and all that, and when it came out, it looked like a glowing craft. Okay? It somehow had just sort of created this blurred image that literally looked like the old bubble dome saucer-shaped, 1950s UFO Hollywood style. Okay? You following me so far?
Mm-hmm.
So I showed this to some other people, and they were swearing up and down that I had photographed a UFO. And I waited, and I allowed a room full of people to actually look at this thing while it was being developed. They were totally amazed. I wouldn't answer any questions. I simply said I went outside and took a photograph out of the sky. That's all I said. And, because I found this amusing. It was at a party. Everybody's drinking, okay?
That explains.
So even better, but it doesn't matter, because even the designated drivers were looking at it and saying, oh, my God, it looks just like a UFO. And meanwhile, all it was a blurry picture of the moon.
Mm-hmm.
Not to say I couldn't have photographed a UFO. I'm simply saying that isn't what that particular photograph was. And I think of that often when I see a lot of these conclusions being jumped to by people who take a glance at a photograph and make up an entire story for that one particular thing and fill in many blanks in their minds with even a singular image. That happens all the time.
Uh-huh.
Anyway. Sorry again, we only have about 10 minutes left, and I swear I'm going to try and shut up and you know, put a piece of duct tape on my mouth a bit and let you speak here for the last little bit. But I do want to thank you for coming on in case the bumper kicks in before I get a chance to, and say that, you know, check out Lee Bracker's work. You know, give them, you know, first of all, the name of one of those videos again that they can find on YouTube, and the name of that of one of the websites again.
The website where I analyzed film, because that was the topic of our evening,
Yeah, it's
Dismantle the Beam Project.
Right. I would search for it as Dismantle the Beam Project. The web address is kind of cumbersome. But Dismantle the Beam, if you search for it in Yahoo or Google, I just found out, you will find it easily. And also give them the title of one of the videos that they can find out there easily.
Oh, dear.
Can't think of one off the top of your head? How about the channel? I'm sorry, how about the channel name?
The channel name?
Yeah,
You're talking about the address to that particular site?
Well, no, because some of your stuff's on YouTube also.
Oh, well, you know what? I had my Vimeo account pulled by somebody that I was chasing after, radio show network that's not doing the right thing out there, and they managed to have my Vimeo site pulled.
Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't realize that.
Oh, it was a big thing. It was, you know, and I expected these things to happen, so I had to put many of my videos back up on Google Drive, or Drive Google, which means that they don't have titles.
But can they find you, like, by going through your Google Plus?
They can, but I think that the best place to start would be nwocsi.wordpress.com, and if they go there, they'll have links to everything that I do. My Facebook account, which has, and my YouTube account, which will have I do have YouTubes up in there. Okay. They're scattered. I got in big trouble with, you know, doing what I do, but I did a pretty good job with them. So, you know, touche.
Gotcha. I understand. Okay, so if everybody goes to nwocsi .wordpress.com, is that right?
That's correct.
Okay. nwocsi.wordpress.com, and also I just had it in front of me, and also Dismantle the Beam Project. Just do a search for that, and you'll find a lot of articles, actually really nicely illustrated as well. A lot of information, visually appealing, just so you guys know. Also, and there's video links in a lot of the articles and stuff, so that you can go straight to, you know, relevant material of Lee's on there as well. So now I'll shut up. Sorry, but I wanted to make sure people could find you after the show, or if they catch this, you know, on YouTube or something, and they want more, they can go find your stuff. And we'll definitely have some other conversations other nights, because you're not simply relegated to you know, dissecting films and explaining how they sort of fit into technological realities and stuff like that. Actually, there's a whole lot more stuff you do. So we could definitely envision some future shows if you know, if you weren't too annoyed with the fact that I talked over you a lot.
I don't mind at all, and it's because I don't know your audience either. So you know them better than I do. That I could be just going off on a tangent and like, let's shut Lee off. So.
Believe me, they'd want me to shut up before you. A lot of my audience hates me, so it's all good. Don't worry about it.
Interesting. They hate to listen to you.
Some of them do, yeah.
Well, just so your audience knows, I'm probably the most hated person in independent alternative media. And a lot of it has to do with the fact that I flushed out quite a number of people who portray themselves as truthers, and they're really not. They're in it for themselves, self-serving. They'll go to any length to get attention, pat themselves on the back, deny the truth, and spoil people's reputations.
Well, I'll tell you what. Let's think about doing a show devoted to that kind of thing.
You want to do? Okay, we'll have fun.
Yes, I do, because you know what? I've got a new array of stories that can be added to that as well, and I think we could probably ratchet up that hate quotient a little bit for both of us that night, because people tend to get angry when you call out some of their heroes and some of the nonsensical ideas that they push.
Right.
So, but I'm all for that, sir.
I am
I'm
too, but I got to be extremely cautious as well for the mere reason is that I'm unlike most trackers, hunters. I'm not about killing or spoiling reputations. I'm about hoping that they make change, because a bad person out there could also be an attribute if they change their ways.
Oh yeah,
To get,
and I'm all for that as well. I mean, I have a focus on the JFK thing, and I've devoted entire shows to calling out the myth makers in the JFK assassination community, the people that push fictitious nonsense for their own personal gains and things like that. And believe me, I'm all for doing that on a lot of different levels. It just so happens that I've got a deeper amount of insight into that particular subject, but I got many more people and many more projects that I would like to call on the carpet. We'll have a strategy meeting about that one, though, because we want to be
okay.
nice and careful that we don't, wind up with a flurry of lawsuits afterwards and all that. But
Trust me, they don't have money.
yeah, well, most of them don't, but some of them do. And either way, we'll have a little strategy meeting about that and bring you back. Like I said, we've only got a couple of minutes left. Is there sort of a closing thought you want to leave people with the last 2 minutes here?
Well, everybody's more than welcome to contact me, and my email address, and I got to make sure my new phone number is up there. But I don't make myself a secret. I'm out there with my name, and I don't play games with my email written out there. Like I'll put the full email address there so it's not split up.
Right.
If I do that, then I'm playing the part of the secret societies and acting like them, and I don't want to be like them. So Carrie Cassidy actually taught me that lesson. She said, if you hide yourself in plain sight, they're not going to touch you. And
That's
she's
true.
right. She's right.
That is absolutely true. And just as a side note, by the way, and again, I want to thank my guest Lee Bracker for tonight. I want to thank everybody who decided to tune into The Ochelli Effect, which is the name of this show, even though I do forget to say it, except for at the beginning and the end. You can go to ucy.tv/TOE, and there you will find the RSS feed, the archives if you know how to get to them, the YouTube playlist, and a couple of other things, including a donate button if you feel like giving me the same courtesy that you would a pizza man, which is, hey, look, I'm trying to deliver you some information. He delivers you a pizza, which in most parts of this country is crap anyway. So if you feel like throwing a couple of bucks my way, that would be much appreciated. Also, there's other links to other shows on UCY and all that kind of good stuff that you can find there. But once again, ucy.tv/TOE. And, of course, my email address, just so everybody knows, is chuck1972@lycos, Lycos, that is, .com. And, again, want to thank you. And, of course, it's Saturday night, so coming up next will be Jaded. And I have no clue what goes on that show. I have no idea what the strategy may be or if there is one. So, that's all I've got to say. And again, thanks for listening. And Lee, really, I do appreciate you coming on tonight. And I hope you had fun. And like I said before, that you're willing to do this again.
Oh, absolutely. Thanks, Chuck, for having me on. I hope that people come back to the show after today.
Believe me, if I can't drive them away with all the things that they say about me and all the animosity that seems to be developing about me, they won't hate you for it. In fact, they probably like you a lot better than me, and they don't even know who you are. It's okay. Don't worry about it. And even if they do know who you are, it's still always good to dislike me. That's fun. So that's the way that goes. But at least you and I can get along during a conversation. And don't know. Sorry about the phone caller at the beginning of the show there, or the couple of phone callers at the beginning of the show. I did want to hold you off, and you didn't decide to call back in. So.